Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is a continuation of my July garden tour where I'm going over literally every plant that's been put into this landscape in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. This is a small urban lot, and there's a lot of different varieties out here. The space that we're going to walk down today is a back path in the back garden. If you go back to the original planning that I did for this space, and there is a playlist called New House if you want to go back and see how I got to this point. There is a path that runs along the back, and there's going to be a new fence going all the way around this back property. And I know people get tired of hearing there's going to be, but lumber is so much right now that I've kind of been hopefully waiting for it to come down a little bit. But there's going to be a horizontal fence in the back. There's a temporary fence back here, and there's about 3 feet on the other side of that that's going to be some additional larger growing green things that will give a backdrop to this space. And then there's a few things back here that will probably be moved around at that point because I'm not necessarily satisfied with where everything is sitting. There's also empty space back here, so I've got the opportunity to add some things. So let's get started on what will be the second to last of these July tour videos. The plant that's directly in front of me is a Ralston viburnum. This is a low-growing viburnum that Viburnum obovadum, which is actually native. This is a dwarf version of it. It was named after J.C. Ralston from the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. It is a maybe the longest flowering thing in my landscape. This will start flowering in October, November, and it will flower on and off through the winter until it gets hot in the early summer. The library on NC State's campus has about, 100 of these planted in front of them. And honestly, there's probably flowers on them 12 months out of the year, which is kind of amazing. Maybe not right this minute in the peak of the summer. Great evergreen, low-growing plant. Can't recommend this Ralston dwarf viburnum enough. Beside me is another golden Oakland holly. There was one in the third tour video in the front yard in a container. And it is super tight, compact. This one is a bit stretched because there's some oak tree above me here that puts it in the shade by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's still quite showy, and I want to keep it here. I want something here that's going to end up quite tall behind these white wedding hydrangeas that I showed in the last tour video. The space around here has lots of opportunity for me to find other things interesting things to add to the landscape. There's a native azalea behind it. This is one of Buddy Lee's introductions from the Southern Living Plant Collection. This is Solar Glow is the name of this variety. What I want to point out on this deciduous azalea, number one, here's the flower buds already forming for next year. Super fun. I love deciduous azaleas. Rhododendrons are kind of this way too, native rhododendrons, where the flower buds start forming the season before, and it's kind of, it's a 6-month, 8-month thing, getting excited about the flowers coming. These are super, super bright and showy, but the main thing I want to point out on this variety is how clean this foliage is. I really have never seen a deciduous azalea that by July isn't just kind of a train wreck of spotted leaves and losing leaves and chewed up leaves and everything else. But this thing, he really knocked it out of the park on picking plants that look good. It looks good 12 months out of the year. There's some yellow coleus planted down below. There were some things just kind of plopped into place because this is the least planted, least planned place in the landscape so far. And so there were some things added to it just to make it look like this path runs through here. So I got the gold coleus there, got a variegated coleus that has a pink center. Few flowers on it right now. There's some impatiens in that spot, and they're doing pretty well, as you would expect in a shade garden. This is a pittosporum that I bid on in a rare plant auction from the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. It is literally a pittosporum with a number after it. It is an unnamed variety. It's doing pretty well in the landscape. I honestly don't have any idea what it will do in the next few years, but we'll see pretty soon. I don't know if they've given it a name since I acquired it. I need to go over there at some point and ask that question, I guess. We'll jump back and forth on the path. You'll see my temporary fence back here. This is basically just to keep Griffin, if you're familiar with my two dogs, Griffin, in the landscape since I took down the chain link fence in the back. So again, there's about 3 feet beyond this temporary fence, which is quite unattractive, I realize. But again, I've left room back here for an opportunity to plant some larger growing, shade tolerant, evergreen things as a backdrop to this garden. There's a Big Daddy hydrangea that has pretty much finished blooming at this point. One issue I have back here on this back line is this oak and these large growing trees back here. There's actually a Magnolia grandiflora up above this, which is native to our area here. But the oak, the magnolia, and then all the noxious weeds that are back there, the ligustrum and the ivy and everything else that's growing back there, are very greedy. And so I have an issue along this back line of things staying a little dry. So this hydrangea was definitely in competition for water as it was blooming. And me being out of town a couple times, it did not perform to its peak, but still not bad. These flowers were probably, I don't know, 8 inches across, 7-8 inches across. And in the future, they just get gigantic on Big Daddy. There's a Hosta that was already here in the landscape that was just moved to this space. There's a rhododendron that was planted back here in a video. Again, I've let it get dry, and it's actually dry right now. I can see the base of it is a little bit dry. And, I have to be careful not to overwater rhododendrons in my clay soil. But my situation back here is very opposite. I've got root competition for it. So it is budding up, and I think we'll have I'll have some flowers on it next season, but we'll see. There's a few polka dot plants and some Terrenia planted. Again, there's just some annuals that were added into the space just to kind of give it make it look like I was on my way to something back here, which has not happened. It's not happened yet, but I'm on the way. I have a lot of interesting hellebores along this back line, and up at the Pine Knot open house sale, you can buy hellebores in little teeny tiny pots. And so that is an example of a hellebore from a teeny tiny pot. It takes 2 and 3 years to have them really establish themselves and bloom well in the wintertime. One other interesting thing I have here, and somebody has probably watched enough of my videos to remember this, Akuba Japonica. I went to a friend of mine's nursery in Benson, North Carolina, and he had a group of gold dust Akuba, which have a lot of spotting on the leaves, and intentional variegated spotting on the leaves. And I noticed that this was a different one. It was in the group, and again, it had some differences from the other gold dust, and it has been in this space since then, and is looking fantastic. And you can see the spotting is irregular and different. It's just a completely different plant. I don't think commercially anybody would want this plant because, but for me it's super interesting because it's definitely a one-of-a-kind Akuba Japonica. We'll maybe call it Akuba Japonica hort tube. Maybe I'll take some cuttings on it here in the next week when I'm doing some cuttings. But it is a one-of-a-kind Akuba Japonica, and again, I just saw a difference on it versus all the other gold dust that he had in his nursery. There's a Camellia Cesanqua here that is a variety that I had found years ago. It's a pinkish red color that is one of 9,000 pinkish red varieties that is unnamed and doesn't kind of matter. It blooms well. It's a good looking plant. It's going to not stay here along the path. It will jump to the back row because this plant will get 10 or 12 feet tall. So once the fence is in, this and a couple other things will probably be dug up and moved backwards, and lower growing things will end up here along the path. From the Camellia Cesanqua on the fence side, I'll jump back to this side for a minute, just go back and forth. There's a Farfugium planted in this space, and you can see how happy and healthy that one is. It really likes that spot. It's actually planted next to an acanthus This acanthus was newly planted late last year, and it has not had enough time in the ground to really establish itself yet and flower. In the future, this thing will be gigantic. It'll fill up this entire space, and big giant leaves, big beautiful flower spikes. Super thorny plant. It's one that you watch where you grab a hold of an acanthus. It can even the flowers have spines. There's actually 4 different acanthus planted in this space. Again, I just want them to fill this up, and flower spikes will be up 4 or 5 feet next year. There's another one of those wire vines that I showed in a container up by the porch area that I've got a lot of ground covers planted into the landscape that eventually will be things to reduce the amount of mulch that I need, and so that's kind of will be the purpose of that. It does spread, doesn't really scare me. It's not like ivy, spreading or anything like that. I can take this one out pretty easily. Behind it is a soft caress Mahonia, looking great. This is just such a great shade, evergreen shrub. What else can you say about it? It blooms in the winter time. Not quite as cold hardy as some other Mahonia, zone 7 hardy. The Marvel Mahonia behind me that I'll show you in a minute, zone 6 hardy. But what a great plant, just great texture. This thing can just go into any shade garden, honestly, and just kind of blend in with anything. Behind it are some more impatiens, some gold coleus, the pittosporum. There are 3 evergreen pittosporum, dwarf pittosporum. I showed in the last tour video a green dwarf pittosporum. This is a variegated one. This one's called Mojo. Great plant. Planted 3 of them around the container with the Japanese maple in it. And there's a purple foliage ajuga behind it. And again, the shrubs are definitely where they're going to stay. Some of the the annual plantings will be. I'll find other perennials that I want to fill in some of these spaces. This has been out of sight, out of mind back here on this back line, and so this spring a lot of annuals were just plugged in here until I'm kind of excited about this space because so much of the rest of the landscape I don't have a lot of space left to put perennials and other flowering things, and back here on this back line still have a lot I can do here. My contorted Japanese maple is in that container. I've had this thing for years and years. Everybody who's been watching the channel for a long time has seen this thing lots of times. I have contorted it over the years, and in fact, I said recently that I need to restake it and bend it back soon, and I will do that, and I'll show you when I do it. I've just been a little bit busy. I may actually wait for it to lose its leaves at this point before I do any major surgery to it. It's been in that container for a while. It's been in this container for about 1.5 years. It was in a slightly smaller container before that. When I pot it up, it only goes into a container that's just slightly larger each time. Why is it not in the ground? Well, it's traveled with me. It was an interesting piece at my garden center for people to see, and then it was an interesting piece at the old house, and now it's an interesting piece in this landscape. So it's been a traveling plant. So that's why it's always been a container plant. Back over here on this side, there's a Brunera here called Alchemy Silver. Just beautiful foliage on that Brunera. There's some empty space in here, which has some mayaples actually planted. They came up. They didn't bloom for me this first season, but they will. I got native mayaples and a Chinese mayapple, and I want them to kind of fill in some of this space. There'll be some other things planted over the top of them in the future, because they come up, flower, and then immediately, almost immediately, die back to the ground. They know when the party's over and it's time to go home. There's a Hookerella called Buttered Rum, and again, it's just defining the edge of this space, and eventually this thing will be more organized, where I'll have lower things heading up toward taller things at a fence that's coming. There's a Pieris on the back row called Mountain Snow. Fantastic variety, blooms white in the spring. I've had great success with this plant at the old house and here so far, except for the fact that, again, you can see some yellow leaves down in the interior of it. That is from it being dry, and unfortunately I'm going to have to double the amount of drip irrigation lines through here when I get all my drip irrigation running. Definitely going to have to always know that this back line, because of the roots from these trees, is going to be vulnerable. This really beautiful hosta is called Blue Ivory. I've got it in a little bit too much sun. What's interesting is about this back line is the further I get toward the shed, the less that oak has an impact. And so by the time I get here, I'm starting to get, whereas over there I'm probably getting 3 hours of direct sun or even less. By the time I'm down here, I may be getting 4 to 5 hours, and it's actually burning this one. Plus the white foliage hostas tend to be more vulnerable to burning anyway. So this one's gonna have to be popped up and moved to a slightly shadier space, but what a beauty. I mean, this is one of the brightest, most beautiful hosta I've ever seen, honestly, with that really super broad white variegation. But again, they are pretty vulnerable to burning. Here's another piece that's gonna get moved to the back line once the fence is up. This is a Marvel Mahonia. You can see it's already reached about 4.5 feet in height. Those of you unfamiliar with Marvel, number one, this one will grow in zone 6, where the soft caress over there is definitely, again, not quite as cold hardy. This one will get a flower cluster on the top of it that is 2.5 feet wide and 2 feet tall. It's just incredible in the winter time. Very spiny, but you know, I don't have to come back here and hug it or anything, so it doesn't really matter. And it's not something that needs frequent pruning or anything like that. So the amount of times you'd ever need to worry about it being spiny is going to be very, very limited. So it doesn't really matter. But again, beautiful, upright, evergreen foliage year round. And then of course the winter flowers. Another big giant hosta back here in storage that was already on the property. Haven't really decided what's going on with it, but this is going to flip to the back line. The hosta will likely flip kind of where it is in all likelihood. There's an Elysium in the back here. This is Elysium floridanum, native Elysium to the southeast. It's not a named cultivar. This is just Elysium. There's a flower on it here. The flowers are super, super interesting on Elysium. This is a great screening plant, and I don't know whether I'll move it back a little bit when the time comes, but you can't really miss with this. It's evergreen. The deer don't eat it. The rabbits don't eat it. Great screening plant. Those of you who live in the southeast, you know, this is a native that can definitely help make your neighbor go away pretty quickly in a shaded space. And there's, you know, so, and it's drought tolerant and it's kind of wet tolerant. A lot of things going for that plant. Again, there's just a ton of hellebores planted, lots of different varieties. I buy these from, you know, specialty nurseries. A lot of new interesting foliage and flowering hellebores coming to market. This is another one of those aspidestra with the stripes on it. I believe this one's called Stars and Stripes. But initially, when you buy one of these interesting aspidestra, you'll notice that the leaves are almost entirely green. And then as they start to mature, they'll start to show some of those, the characteristics that you actually purchased it for. But this one just from nowhere had 5 leaves that looked terrible on it, and out of nowhere it's just, you know, grown really, really quickly. I've got a couple Rhodia back here that I got from Mr. Maple. I've got a regular green Rhodia in the front landscape. Those of you who don't know Rhodia, these are they're almost like evergreen hosta. There are, from what I understand, you know, just hundreds and hundreds of named cultivars in Japan, and we just kind of underuse them here in the States. I mean, I do see Rhodia in gardens, but not enough of it really. They have spotted ones and striped ones and just all kinds of variegations. You name it. They're ones that look like what you want them to look like, and they're like evergreen hosta. Just a great shade addition. There's some impatiens planted in front of it again, and some Terrenia over here just to fill the space in. Behind the cast iron plant, there is a Jack in the Pulpit that is just quite vigorous. This one's super, super happy in this space. I'm going to cover the area along the building in the next in the next tour video, and the vegetable garden, some other things that I have left. I've got my a cart behind me that I've had at the garden center I worked at when I was 16. I pushed this cart around way back then, and when they closed down, I got that cart, and so that cart will be in a lot of videos because I don't have a great place to store it, but I've had it. God, I've been living with that cart for 36 years now, 35 years. Last couple things I'll cover in this video. There's an October Magic Ruby Camellia. This is kind of a double, almost red flowering Camellia Cesanqua. Blooms in the fall. This is another one of Bobby Green's introductions, Southern Living Plant Collection variety that is super clean. Those of us who've been growing Camellia Cesanquas for a long time, a lot of the old varieties get very spotted leaves. This one is so clean, and the flowers are double. We'll call them red, but most things we call red are on the pink spectrum. But what a great plant, and it's a low spreading variety. I mean, that thing would look good in any part shade space. Last plant I'll cover in this one. This is a San Gabriel Nandina, and it'll eventually kind of fill in this space. It has this really fine texture, similar to that soft caress Mahonia that I showed you before. This is a very young plant. In the winter time, it'll turn kind of an orangey red, and the rest of the time, it'll just have this, narrow, super narrow leaf. It's very newly planted. It went in the ground within the last couple months, and it'll probably take a couple seasons to actually, get any real growth on that one. So thank you guys again for following along with these tour videos. I don't know what number this one is at this point, 8 maybe. And I've got this section behind me. Bees are working very hard over here. I'll show you in the next round. It'll also include peonies that are about to go to sleep, and then the vegetable garden and a few other things people have been asking about. Thanks for watching.